Hello everyone, welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Today we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 6th of July 2024. So let's begin with the analysis. Before we begin, a list of articles what we are going to discuss in today's news analysis. First is Junta under pressure as fierce fighting breaks out in northeastern Myanmar. Now, this basically is an article related to the conflict that we have seen in Myanmar. So, before we go on to what has been happening of late, we'll also have a discussion on the historical context. We'll try to understand what has been happening until now before we pick up the article and what the article has been discussing. Then there are two more articles that we are going to discuss from the prelims perspective, one related to the assault rifles and then one related to the African swine fever. So yes, there are little less number of articles which I saw important as a part of your prelims or mains examination preparation. Although there are some news articles which are important news articles from Indian perspective, but not so much from the perspective of the examination. For example, this is the time of the year when Assam every year gets marred by floods, and the situation again has been pretty difficult for the people of Assam. I just hope that those things, the flood subsides as quickly as possible. Apart from that, there have been two more discussions that we saw in the newspaper. One with regard to the unfortunate Hathras stampede incident, and then the second one with regard to the West Bengal violence and some of the issues related to the violence against women that we have seen in the past couple of days. Past couple of days. So that's why those are some of the other articles, although I do not see a direct relevance for them in your examination. So let's begin with our discussion. The first topic of discussion for us is Junta under pressure as fierce fighting breaks out in northeastern Myanmar. Now, before we begin the understanding of the article, we'll look at some of the histories and what has been happening. So, for example, when you look at Myanmar, formerly what was known as Burma, it has been plagued by ethnic conflicts even since its independence from the British colonial rule that happened back in 1948. And since then, we have been seeing that there have been a lot of problems that we have seen between the military and the people of Myanmar. Now, in this context, when we look at Myanmar, what we understand is that when it comes to Myanmar, it has been home to numerous ethnic groups. Many of these ethnic groups, they have long-standing grievances against the central government. Now, when we look at the military in Myanmar, that is also known as the Tatmadaw. If you know this, they are also known as the Tatmadaw. Now, they have been ruling Myanmar for most of its post-independence history, either directly or through proxy governments. So this is something that we have seen in the past. Now, the military's control has been marked by human rights abuses and also a lot of repression of the ethnic minorities in Myanmar. This is where we see that it also has given rise to a lot of ethnic armed organizations. There have been various ethnic groups that have formed armed organizations to fight for a greater autonomy or cultural rights, or in some cases even independence. Sorry. So what we have seen is that there have been a lot of ethnic groups. And most of these ethnic groups that have been formed, they either are looking for autonomy or they are looking for cultural rights, or in certain cases what we have seen is that they have been looking for a complete independence. Now, there are some groups which are prominent. For example, the Tang National Liberation Army is one, Myanmar National Democratic Alliance is another one, and the Arakan Army is another one. So these three have been prominent. So I'll just give you the names also for the context in your examination. First, just remember that there is the Tang National Army, alright, Tang National Liberation Army. Then after that we have seen that there is Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and then we have the Arakan Army. So these are three, you can say, such prominent groups. Then after that, what we have seen is that when it comes to Myanmar, we have seen in the past that there have been a lot of conflicts between these groups and the army. Now, what we see is that if you go back in time, and in 2011 specifically, Myanmar began a transition to, you can say in a manner, a quasi-civilian government, which led to the election of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy that happened in 2015. Now what we see is that this government was formed, but at the same time the military still retained significant power and control over some of the key government ministries. Now this is where we come to 2021. In 2021, on 1st of February 2021, the military staged a coup and it overthrew the elected LND government, and it arrested Aung San Suu Kyi and some of the other leaders as well. Now this is something that sparked widespread protests and civil disobedience across the country. Now in this particular scenario, we see that there is formation of a lot of resistance forces. In response to this coup, various different anti-coup resistance groups started to emerge, and this is what also includes People's Defense Forces, for example, which aligned with the National Unity Government. Now this is something that started forming a parallel government by ousting all the lawmakers and the activists, etc. This is where we see that intensification of the conflict starts in Myanmar. The coup started to intensify. The ongoing conflict between the military and the ethnic armed organizations started to intensify. And this is where all these three armies, for example, we see that they started to find an opportunity and they started to push their own agendas against the weakened and the stretched out military regime. So this is where we saw that these three, they formed something called as the Three Brotherhood Alliance. Alright, what they formed is something called as Three Brotherhood Alliance. They formed Three Brotherhood Alliance. Alright, now in this particular scenario, what we basically see is that once they start forming this alliance, they started to coordinate their military efforts against the Tatmadaw. Now this is where they have launched significant offenses, and this also includes the very recent 1027 offensive that started in October 2023. 1027. Now why is this 1027? Because it started on 27th of October. So that's why 27th October 2023, that's why the name has been given as 1027 offensive. Now in this regard, we also need to understand the China and how China also influences this entire conflict. China has a significant interest in Myanmar, particularly in maintaining the stability along its own borders. So what we have seen is that Beijing has historically supported some of the ethnic militia and has played a very significant role in brokering ceasefires as well, including the ceasefire that was brokered by them back in January 2024. And this is what brings us to the current situation, and this is what this article is about. The article basically talks about the fact that there are new fightings that have erupted in the northeastern Myanmar. And this has ended the Chinese brokered ceasefire, and it has intensified the pressure on the military regime, which has already been facing attacks from the resistance forces on multiple different fronts in the country's civil war. The Tawang National Liberation Army, it has resumed its attack on the regime positions, and this happened last week in the northeastern states, the Shan State. Alright, so this is basically what we have seen, that in the Shan State last week they have intensified their conflict. Now, in this context, what we also see is that in the neighboring Mandalay region also, we have seen that these kind of conflicts, they have intensified. The Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, it has also joined the conflict, and we saw that by this Friday, they actually had combined the forces and they have reportedly encircled the strategic city of Lashio. Now, Lashio basically is headquarters of the regime's northeastern military command. So that's why Lashio becomes very crucial in this context. Now, the renewed fighting is basically seen as the next phase of the 1020 offensive, where we see that the TNLA is aiming to eradicate the military dictatorship and trying to protect the local people. Now, the military regime, which has taken the power from Aung San Suu Kyi's elected government back in 2021 February, it has accused the militia of endangering the civilians. In Mandalay, for example, the local People's Defense Forces, they have joined the TNLA's offensive, and they have seized nearly 20 military outposts. The offensive by the three military brotherhood, in this context, what we see is that they initially made significant advances, and they have taken large areas in the north and the northeast, including the important border crossings also with China. So that is basically what we have seen in this context. Now, overall, what we have seen is that when it comes to China, for example, China has very close ties with the alliance militias, and has, as I told you, that the January ceasefire was also brokered by China. So they have expressed readiness to support the renewed peace talks, but they have also urged all the parties to try and abide by the ceasefire agreements, and to also ensure the safety of China-Myanmar border as well. So that's why we have seen that in this context, the Myanmar army also, what we have seen is that they also have been trying to push for preparing for the defenses and security measures in advance. Now, the objectives, when it comes to the objectives of the ethnic groups, it remains unclear, because there are possibilities ranging from expanding territorial gains to also consolidating the positions, while also trying to maybe ensure that they can get or consolidate their positions altogether. So that's why we have to see what direction it actually takes and where we go from here on. But overall, we see that the conflicts over the last week has intensified again. Now, moving on to a couple of prelims related articles, and this is where we have two articles, one related to diseases and one related to the defense, that is Indo-China Russian venture delivered 35 assault rifles to Ministry of Defense. Now, in this context, just understand this more than what the news is. What exactly is this AK-203 assault rifle is more important from this perspective. So this right here is what you see as the Kalashnikov AK-203 assault rifle. Right now, in this context, when it comes to this rifle, we are talking about the Kalashnikov AK-203 assault rifles. Now, this basically is a modernized version of the AK-47 rifle. You might have heard about the AK-47. So this is said to be AK-203 is said to be a modernized version of AK-47 rifle, and this is designed by the Kalashnikov concern in Russia. Now this has been a part of the AK-200 series, which is known for its reliability and durability and also the ease of use. Now AK, this term is very often seen as in automatic rifles. AK basically stands for Automat Kalashnikov. Automat basically means automatic. So this is Automat Kalashnikov. Alright, so Automat, whenever you come across this term, this basically means automatic. Right, so we are talking about automatic rifles, where we have AK-47, which has been pretty much in discussion always, and now we have AK-203. So, and for those of you who have played Battleground India, you might know AKM, which uses a caliber that is 7.62, right? So this basically also uses 7.62 into 39 mm caliber, which is same as also AK-47 and AKM in your Battleground game. So the effective range of this basically is approximately 400 meters. All right, it has a 400 meters range. Then at the same time, some of the other aspects of it, approximately 600 rounds. 600 rounds of fire per minute is the capacity of this AK-203. Typically, when it comes to the magazine capacity, it is capable of having approximately 30 rounds. 30 rounds of magazine is available. Now, one of the major important aspects of it is the weight. Weight of AK-203 is lighter than the previous models. That's why it makes it more maneuverable for the soldiers as well. And that's why when it comes to AK-203, it is intended to replace the older rifles in the Indian Army, and that's why it offers enhanced performance and modern features which are going to be suitable for all the current combat requirements for the Indian Army. So this is basically what this article is about, that ahead of India Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, we see that a joint the Indo-Russian Rifle Private Limited, that is IRRPL, has delivered 35,000 Kalashnikov AK-203 assault rifles to the Indian Ministry of Defense, and this is a part of the 5,000 crore contract that was signed back in July 2021 to manufacture over 6.1 lakh AK-203 assault rifles in India with technology transfer from Russia. So we have seen that approximately 70,000 rifles are being made by India, starting with just 5% localization to up to 70% localization, where we are now achieving 100% localization in manufacturing, in production. So this is where we are. So more than anything else, what's important is for us to also understand what is this AK-203 assault rifle. Now moving on to the last article of the day, and this is about the African swine fever. The African swine fever cases that have been reported at Kerala farm. Now, when it comes to the African swine fever, it is actually a very highly contagious viral disease that affects domestic and wild pigs both at the same time. It is characterized by high fever, then loss of appetite, then hemorrhages in the skin and the internal organs as well. At the same time, we see that the mortality rates are very high, approaching even 100% in cases. So that's why just remember that it starts with high fever. All right, so there can be high fever, loss of appetite, then at the same time, loss of appetite, then what we see is that it can lead to hemorrhages in the skin and internal organs. So Uh, Now just understand this term also. When we say hemorrhages, and even in case of dengue you will come across this term, hemorrhagic fever is what we say there. So in skin and internal organs, alright, and mortality rate is very high mortality. Now when we say hemorrhages, as I told you that this term is important because in case of dengue also we come across this term. It refers to, basically you can say, escape of blood from the ruptured blood vessels, which basically results in bleeding. And it can happen internally, where the blood can leak into tissues, organs, or even cavities within the body, or it can happen externally, where the blood can start escaping through a break in the skin itself. So when it comes to this African swine fever, it basically is formed, it happens because of the African swine fever virus, which belongs to a particular family which is called as aspirants family. Just know these terms, alright? Aspirants family. So this is a virus that belongs to the aspirants family, and that's why there are some things that we should know. For example, the transmission. How does the transmission happen? The virus basically can spread through direct contact with the infected pigs, or indirect contact through maybe contaminated food or water or even equipments, and maybe also via certain species of ticks as well. The symptoms, that's why we know that high fever, loss of appetite, hemorrhages, etc., they all can be the symptoms. Even vomiting or diarrhea, respiratory issues, all these things can happen. The infected pigs will often die within 7 to 10 days after the infection. Now one thing crucial to note is that this fever, it does not have any impact on humans. It does not have any impact on human populations, but it can basically lead to economic losses because of the loss in the pork industry and also the pig populations. Now prevention and cure wise, unfortunately there is no vaccine or there is no treatment as of now for the African swine fever, but we have to see how exactly the things go. Unfortunately, that's why, because of that, culling of these pigs are required whenever these kind of cases happen. So that is basically what we have seen, that the outbreak has happened in Thrissur, and 310 pigs will be culled as a result of this. So this is where we are. The area within 1 kilometer radius has been declared as disease hit, and 10 kilometers radius as a disease surveillance area. So this is basically where we are right now with this particular disease. Now lastly, let's have a look at the question based on today's mains article. The 1027 offensive by the Three Brotherhood Alliance marks a significant escalation in Myanmar's ongoing conflict. Discuss the historical context and the implications of this offensive on regional stability and India's strategic interests. Now you know that India shares a border with Myanmar, so obviously whatever happens, all the ethnic conflicts that happen, and even with the coup and the problems that we have seen that a lot of people have been trying to escape from Myanmar and into the Indian borders as well. So that's why the northeastern borders, India needs to be very vigilant with the northeastern borders, and many a times it can lead to conflicts here also. Sometimes we see that some of the armed conflicts are also run from within the Indian borders. So that's why India also plays a very significant role here, and because of the influence of China also in this conflict, India always has to keep a very close eye. So this is it for today's session. I hope that this session was helpful for you. Thank you very much for being here.